Okay.
Got it.
So I will recount some of my journey. I mean, I'll go back a little bit to set the stage. My dad was a science teacher who was the son of a Presbyterian minister who, because of his scientific mind, which became more and more empirical as time went on, rejected Christianity. And so, at some level, my life journey, even as a teenager, was trying to understand the relation of faith and science. And so, I was,
Oh,
in some ways, pre inclined for what would later come as Torrance. He wasn't the immediate one who would answer those questions. The place of my mother grew up in the Salvation Army tradition. And so her grandfather and mother came from Denmark to be Salvation Army officers, which is pastors. So she came from a tradition that was warm and loving and things like that. And so there was a tension in my understanding of Christianity that I saw benefits of my dad's, sharp mind, but he rejected Christianity. My mom wasn't the thinker, but she had a life that, in a sense, conveyed warmth and relationships. And so the relational side was highly ignited for me at some level at that point. Um, Along the way, I read a book by Bruce Larson on relational theology, No Longer Strangers, and I thought, aha, here's something that introduces me to a world of relationship that's theologically grounded, but um, it doesn't feel cold like the church often felt. So at some level, there was a fire ignited in the phrase relational theology that says, I want to understand through further studies what it means to understand a Christianity that's mindful, um, rigorous in terms of being able to engage the sciences, but passionate and compassionate in engaging human beings in a way that builds their life to kind of fulfillment. So that'll set a backdrop for me then to enter into theological education. I originally did a associate of arts degree in a community college, which furthered my desire to find articulate ways to engage kind of hostile anti-Christian sentiments.
ah,
And so, I mean, ultimately, TF Torrance was going to be the one who kind of gave me that. But there was this setting of the stage of, I need something that isn't just kind of opinion and easily written off. I had professors who would pull out the little chick pamphlets and just make fun of them and all that. It's like I need something way better than that. So this was all precursor to what would come along with that. So I did a degree in youth ministry, but the professor also was very much into education. So he really taught me kind of a science of education that made me really interested in the structure of thought, the organization of thought. And again, this was going to be a precursor to what ultimately was appealing to me in T.F. Torrance's work, is the nature of the orderliness of how we articulate our statements, the nature of the logic or the beauty of the logic of how
mhm.
we engage. So though it was a degree in youth ministry, the guy who was the head had just finished, I think, his um, his D.Ed, Doctor of Education, at
Mm.
one of the Southern schools. I can't remember which one it was, but he was excellent in that. And so he really formatted my mind in a sense to think in a way that really appealed in later times to T.F. Torrance's work. Um, I then went on and did a Bachelor of Theology, which was all the Bible and all the theology that Northwestern University offered. And at that point, I really began to have this sense I want to be a theologian and I want to understand how all this really works at playing out the nature of relationship as a theological agenda and not merely the church looking for what appeals to people. I didn't want it to be a marketing scheme, which sometimes relationality can be a marketing scheme.
Hmm.
So from there, I went on to do, at the same time, two master's degrees, one of them at the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, which furthered a lot of the kind of the skills of a pastor at a master's level with um, some really good professors, one of them particularly theological research methods. He had just graduated with a Master of Library Science and said, by the time you're done with this class, you'll be able to find more information on the most minute subject that you can imagine. And he really fulfilled that. And so this was before computers and everything. So I learned before computer research became a thing. And of course, when they came along, it just got easier, except sometimes the names are changed and things like that. But what one might call the investigative mind of TF Torrance was already at work in understanding how a library scientist works at finding information. And the nature of Torrance and the depth of his thought in some ways represents the completeness of somebody who thinks like a librarian, who sees the whole field and pursues the information that lies in the whole of the field. The book, what I think may become 3 books, My Science of the Personal. I had intended to write 1 book, but the first one is, in a sense, the history that T.F. Torrance draws on, going all the way back to the early church. Well, actually going beyond that, back to the biblical studies, just to show the layers, the many layers of T.F. Torrance and how he came to arrive at what becomes, the core of his Trinitarian thinking and the onto-relational way of being. It has many layers that I would say, again, reflect on a skill set of research that most people don't get. When I was at the University of Otago, I was teaching other doctoral students there how to do what I had gained. And for the most part, they had never been given the tools and the breadth of what one could look for if you just knew it was there. So for me, that whole sense of the depth of knowledge has been one of the things that I've loved about T.F. Torrance, that along the way I was given the gift of getting ready for something that I didn't know was coming. The Fuller degree that I took then, Fuller had Todd Spidell in California bringing in professors for all of the sites that were around the country. So I took this. These are my notes from my Systematic Theology 3 with James Torrance in 1987. So I was really first introduced to the Torrance tradition with JB. So I have my own notes here, and JB also photocopied a lot of his published work. So that was part of what we read. There are some that I don't know. This one here, just at the top, it says authority, scripture, and tradition with JB Torrance written in. I don't know if this was actually ever published somewhere. So there are a lot of things that came with JB at this point. There were introduction to the Torrance tradition in a pastoral kind of lens, because JB was the ultimate pastor Torrance.
Yes.
Though in some ways one might say that David is that also as well. But so JB in this course did use this chapter 1, baptism, common to Christ and his church, chapters from Theology and Reconciliation by T.F. Torrance. So JB Torrance didn't avoid his brother. He used his resources as well in what it is that he taught. So when I was doing my doctorate, even I've had this file with me and read through, and actually in my PhD, I quoted from JB Torrance in the work that I was doing. When that degree was done, I asked JB Torrance, if I could come and study with him at Aberdeen. He says, "Well, that would be lovely, except I'm retiring." I said, "Darn."
Oh.
So I explained to him the nature of what it is that I was wanting to do. I wanted to understand, quality academic theology that understood the nature of God's being and relationship, and that the nature of how we think about humans flows from that, the nature of the life of the church. And he said, "Well, you need to go to New Zealand and study with my son, Alan. He's studying on the nature of being in relationship and all that." So I went with just that much, raised the money and went down there and studied with Alan, who I arrived in February of 1990. He was there for almost 2 years. So he helped me, find my research topic, understanding the nature of freedom, and John McMurray, John Zazoulis, and Karl Barth, which required that I understand what it meant to be person. So that brought really in the the relational dimension what is there. And then all three of them really had the word freedom as the fullness of what it means to be a person in relationship. But they weren't saying the same thing. And so my work was really distinguishing how do three people who think about being persons in relation articulate it as clarified by how they ultimately see what it means to be a free person. JB had started me in the direction of Karl Barth, so this furthered my interest in Karl Barth. I'd never really engaged John McMurray at all, but John McMurray became one of my favorite people out of that. And I have had people ask if I'd be willing to start a John McMurray reading group, which I'm considering doing that like a once a month John McMurray reading group. So anyway, kind of doing a chapter a week and starting with interpreting the universe, which I think is a good place to start with him. So if you're interested in that, that would be on a probably another day of the week during the day.
Oh. Well, I'd be there.
Okay. So yeah, I'm thinking
Matthew would
maybe
be there.
Wow.
I'm thinking of Monday
Wow.
afternoons on the weeks when Matthew only comes and sees me once a month, but one of the other weeks kind of in that time slot. I
Wow.
might do something like that. So the story kind of continues. I hadn't fully engaged TF Torrance at that point. The this was a conference that studied the TF Torrance tradition, or the Torrance tradition, and that was in 2006 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Really? Baton Rouge?
Baton Rouge. I was hit in the sidewalk. I was talking on the phone like this, across the street, and got hit by somebody who couldn't see me in the sun. And so I was, black and blued on the side for quite some time. This book is basically the text of what happened in that. So Garrett Dawson's introduction to the Torrance traditions, discovering the incarnate savior is particularly the clue.
That's Garrett Dawson?
Garrett Dawson, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I've talked to this incredible guy, Matt Young, about possibly doing something in the Northwest that in a sense would echo what was done in Baton Rouge. And he has a church where he tells me that could be a possibility. So
Oh, you were down there at Garrett Dawson's church, Presbyterian church.
we went to his Presbyterian church. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And the congregation basically, they helped with the food and all that. But at that point in 2006, it was $50 per person. So I mean, it was very affordable, and I stayed in a hotel nearby. So anyway,
That's a wonderful. I mean, that I would love that. I would love that'd be like a dream come true for me to host a Torrance conference at our church. Wow.
yeah,
We've got, I mean, you and I mean, Julie Canlis is up here, and
Jordy's
Andrew
not far away.
Who's that? Oh, Jordy.
Jordy
Yeah.
Ziegler's not far away.
Andrew Purvis is down in Central California. So
Yeah.
anyway, I mean,
Yeah.
that could
Yeah.
be amazing.
Gary Detto said if we did something, he would be part of that. So
Oh, that's
I think
great.
we could put something pretty spectacular together. So we would need to just build on that theme.
Gary Detto preached at my wedding, and Andrew Purvis baptized our son. So those guys are dear to me.
Gary Detto was my advisor on my thesis. He he had to teach me to write academically versus not academically. It was great. I really.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So Marty, so that conference in Baton Rouge was a really big moment for you for Torrance.
Well, it broadened me. It broadened me from just JB Torrance to begin to investigate more TF. I don't know if you know. I mean, people like Todd Spidell and who are some of these? Well, even Gary. I mean, Gary really started with JB, not TF.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And so, Chris Kettler. I mean, these were all JB people first, and I think that JB had the attraction and TF comes later. And so to say the nature of the Baton Rouge conference was really a broader exposure to the Torrance tradition more broadly, which there is the book, is it A Passion for Ministry, that has all three of them have written in that. So, but that doesn't bring in the scientific piece. I begin to see at that point the scientific piece really answering some of my dad's questions, the nature of a scientific theology that was written in such a way that we can gauge those things. But when I was in New Zealand, this was the first TF Torrance book that I owned. When I was studying with Alan, he said, you got to read that and start there. So this is before I stopped writing in books. So, I've got like Matt type writings in there. Now I pretty much use sticky notes along the side and refer to those in researching. So my story with TF Torrance really starts there, with TF Torrance as theologian. He wasn't as engaging as JB Torrance in terms of the things that I was particularly looking for. I didn't feel the relationality at some level, though it's there. You just have to look a little bit more closely.
I wonder
Now,
why. I wonder why that is. Any thoughts on that? Have you?
TF Torrance does not write as clearly and plainly, I think, as JB Torrance, and JB Torrance speaks to the nature of the world in a way, the world as the world as a community of people who need to know a living Christ, kind of. So this book was written in 1989, just before I went to New Zealand, right? I went in 1990. So Christ in our place, the humanity of God in Christ for the reconciliation of the world. It has a little bit of Torrance themes, but again, you have Ray Anderson here, Christopraxis, the ministry and humanity of Christ for the world. JB had introduced me to Ray Anderson in the coursework that I did at Fuller. I also became JB's TA twice in Seattle, then also once in Vancouver. And this is a booklet. He actually bound them together. It's all JB Torrance, illustrations.
There's diagrams.
Wow.
Diagrams and essays. And so that was constructed by JB Torrance. And in that I was a TA, I got that from him. So that was, but the nature of this book, these are all the people who are JB Torrance heroes: Roger Newell, Roland Walls, Jeremy Bigby. There is a sense, Tim Dearborn, who is in Seattle. I don't know if Tim would do something. Do you know Tim, Matt?
A little bit. I knew him a little bit at UPC, but I don't know him.
Yeah. So to say, along this journey in working with JB Torrance, the whole sense of the intellectual rigor of TF Torrance at the beginning point was difficult, but then it became more something that was compelling for the kind of work I wanted to do. My dad was still alive at that point. I never got to have a full Torrance conversation with my dad, but I did do some evening sessions dealing with Dawkins and Christianity. And my dad loved Dawkins, and so I was able to introduce themes from TF Torrance about just the pursuit of truth, the nature of the rigorous study that we do in theology as well as in science, and that we're both on the same page in the pursuit of something. And he walked out that night and said, that was very interesting, that's kind of the most I ever got. But it was, a foundation for beginning to bring the conversation into a way where it wasn't a competition, but it was a respectful conversation. And that's in a sense what TF Torrance was beginning to give to me at that point. There are also courses that I took. My postdoctorate, I did a postdoc at Regent College, 1998, 99. And so JB Torrance taught a course with Jim Houston, the Trinity, the human person, and community. And so I got also to be sitting on that. And again, this is all just furthering a depth into onto relational where JB is kind of bringing it in. JB refers to John McMurray a lot more than TF does. I mean, TF Torrance says a lot, but JB even more. I mean, JB Torrance got his letter of recommendation to go to the University of Edinburgh from John McMurray. He wrote his letter of commendation. So there was a real connection there. And I think that of the two, JB was just more exposed to McMurray in a sense, and so he had a broader sense of the scope. Though there's just, in my mind, there's no question that TF Torrance, deep in his bone and his blood, John McMurray is there. So I'm trying to remember which course, this is a whole nother folder from another course that I sat in on the whole course with JB Torrance. So to say the road to TF Torrance for me was clearly a road through JB Torrance, and then Alan Torrance really opened up more Karl Barth. And because Karl Barth is so key for TF Torrance started making more sense as well. And so each one of them is just feeding the fire of recognizing the value of what it is that that TF Torrance brings, and specific concepts of, like, katafusen, the nature of what is there, which I'm trying to think of, there's the particular phrase on defining the nature of reason, that reason is a human reflection on the nature of the other. I mean, it's a full phrase that is kind of said katafusen, but it's in English, and the word rationality is what's being defined. And that quote of TF Torrance is actually taken verbatim from John McMurray. So I gotten to know John McMurray so well, and so to see something that's critical, which Elmer Collier, in his book on reading TF Torrance, says the pivotal point in understanding TF Torrance's work is this line. He doesn't quote it from being from McMurray, but he quotes where it is in Torrance. And so if you go to the Torrance place that he quotes it from, Torrance there says that this is from McMurray.
Are you talking about where something like what Torrance said? For me, it would be an act of, for not believing God would be an act of sheer irrationality, because it would mean my reason had become unhinged from real being. Are you talking about that?
It's not that quote. It's one that's, it's more like human rationality is a reflection which is entirely informed by the nature of the reality of what is other than that. So it's a way of saying katafusen. And you could say, well, katafusen captures that better, and that comes from the early church. But there's something about the nature of the way that McMurray says it and the way that Torrance quotes it.
Okay,
it
so
has a sense of just saying rationality, which is, so critical for all of Torrance's work. His most succinct definition, Torrance accredits that to McMurray.
Oh, he does, and that you can begin that trail or finding that through Collier's book.
You can find it in Collier's book. Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if there's digital search of Collier's book anywhere about.
Yeah, I think that I have Collier. I don't have Collier's book here.
Yeah.
That my internet went down, so I'm at a friend's house, so I brought a collection of things for telling the story of today. But they're Astound's supposed to come today and get my internet working again. So I'm hoping that will happen.
I wish you the best with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Well,
so the nature of Torrance became more interesting to me when I saw him picking up what I see as just seminal thoughts from McMurray. So in a sense, JB Torrance and John McMurray made Torrance more understandable and more compelling as somebody who was bringing together, in a sense, a mosaic of thoughts that allowed for one to engage an understanding of the nature of human persons, divine persons, the nature of the church, the nature of the engagement with science, And also my third person in my doctorate, John Zazoulis, is Orthodox, right? And he came to the UK because of TF Torrance, though they had a bit of a falling apart, which I'm still working on piecing together the nature of what had happened. And Zazoulis died just within the last month here. But there's something about what Torrance was doing with Eastern Orthodoxy that also was compelling for me because of what I had done with Zazoulis. And JB Torrance really liked Zazoulis. And so Being as Communion had been one of my textbooks in the course that I took from JB Torrance at Fuller Seminary. So I had been piecing together my emotional theological life had been being pieced together by Torrance's, JB Torrance, Alan Torrance. But the coming to fruition in TF Torrance was a gelling of all these, in a sense, coming together for me in being able to speak in all these different domains of people who were writers and the domains in which they worked, Eastern Orthodox, sciences, the life of the church, the life of persons. Ray Anderson was my third doctoral examiner.
Yeah.
Right? So the fact that he was brought in to examine me, it's because there aren't a lot of people in the world who have the kind of the breadth of interest that I have, but he is somebody who has those things and had done his PhD with TF Torrance and all that. So the fact that Ray Anderson was an examiner in 1992 for me also, furthered my interest in Ray Anderson, which also furthered my interest in TF Torrance, who was his Dr. Vater as well. So I didn't have, unfortunately, Purvis, and I didn't get to know him till later, but I mean, he's somebody who would have furthered the nature of the conglomeration of these people who are wrestling with how do we take seriously the nature of God, do the science of God, which again, both T.F. Torrance and Karl Barth are quite overt in bringing in the language of science. And to really begin to recognize through reading Michael Polanyi, which I still have a lot of work to do on writing the relationship between McMurray and Polanyi, and to say, again, I've had small debates with both the Polanyi Society people as well as the McMurray Society people, who both say they had no relation to one another at all. Jim Houston, who taught at Oxford and lived 2 doors down, literally, from Polanyi, said that he had conversations with Michael Polanyi, and one day Polanyi came in and said, "Have you read this book?" And it was John McMurray. He was reading John McMurray, and it would have been, one of his earlier works. It may have been Interpreting the Universe or Reason and Emotion. But it's clear to me that there's something about the nature of understanding the personal that Polanyi came up with that McMurray was in the back of his mind. There's a book which I found the quote, and now I've lost which book had it. I thought I knew which book it was. And this person said that they had gone and talked to John McMurray one day about his relationship with Michael Polanyi. He said, "I was aware of Polanyi. We were both kind of mavericks in the field. And so we didn't want to combine our sense of being, oh, look at those two, out of bounds people. And so we maintained a respectful distance. But we didn't, kind of quote or refer to one another." So to recognize there was a reasoning why they didn't do all that. And then a couple of years ago, I wrote to the Polanyi Society. They had digitalized, tons of resources on Polanyi. One of the things that is in there was a letter that was written to Michael Polanyi asking him to write, like T.F. Torrance did, a commendation for John McMurray being knighted in the UK. Magda, Polanyi's wife, responded to it and said, he would love to, but his health is failing quite a bit. This was written in 1975. Both McMurray and Polanyi died in 1976. So Polanyi was enough aware of John McMurray that Barnes, who was acquiring these letters of recommendation, knew to write to Polanyi, knew that he would be able to make affirmative statements about what it is that McMurray was doing. And Magda, his wife, basically says as much, but he's unable to do it. So again, that's getting pretty close to the end of their life, an awareness of one another. And then to say that the letter that Torrance did write, which appears in the end of the book, the biography of John McMurray, the very last line is, there has been nobody who's made a contribution to the world of social sciences like John McMurray. The only one who's come close is possibly Michael Polanyi. Right. Well, Torrance knew both of them, and he wouldn't have been silent. He knew Polanyi quite well. He was the executor for Polanyi's estate.
Wow.
Is it possible to believe that TF Torrance never had a conversation with John McMurray, with Michael Polanyi about John McMurray? I find it impossible to believe that there wouldn't have been conversations there too. All that to say is that for me, in my mind, all of these people became a mosaic, a conglomerate, and TF Torrance, in some ways, has risen kind of to the head over a symphony of people, of voices that you want to say TF Torrance has, in a sense, systematized and argued and been prolific in his writings beyond any of the other ones at some level, but he also, in some ways, points you to all the others. And so the resonance with all these other voices that reside in TF Torrance, you don't feel like you want just TF Torrance, you want TF Torrance and the depth of what these other people bring to the conversation. The 12 that I'm doing the once a month book readings on right now, those are just other people I didn't know about. And I mean, most of them, Ian Paul, I hadn't heard anybody talk about him, but there's 3 books and they're all very Torrancean, and obviously TF Torrance knew him well enough to ask him to write this book. And so the nature of TF Torrance as being somebody who is a connector, who sees people with gifts and calls them to places where they're going to make a contribution, in many ways that makes him just one of the great heroes, not just as somebody in and of and by himself, but somebody who really created the field. And that's why I think the field of Torrance studies today is maybe as rich as it is, because he was able to throw the ropes wide and bring people into the conversation so that he had a profundity himself that wasn't left just with himself, but really cast the light all around him so that one could see all of these other things. The nature of family dynamics and all these things, it's wonderful that Princeton has the TF Torrance papers. Unfortunately, Ian's made it difficult to kind of get in and photocopy or get to take anything out. It's like you can go in and read them, but you can't take anything out or publish anything that's in those archives. And I went in and took pictures of a sermon. I've been asked to take pictures of a sermon that TF Torrance had done that he refers to. I can't remember. It's on Light. And when I came out of, looking at this, went to the box, got the sermon, took pictures, walk out, and the curator there says, you didn't make any copies of anything, did you? It's like, well, I took some pictures of this. So I said, yep, can't do that. Ian says this, this is all I have left of my father, and I need to protect it. And it's like, okay. So there is a bit of a locking away. It's a little bit hard to understand, and I'm hoping for a future where the Torrance collection becomes more open, because I think there's still a ton. I've been told by people who have more thoroughly researched that there is a ton of stuff that's unpublished and just broadens the conversation. So that's part of the mystique. Someday they'll make a movie about all the themes, the unexplored themes, and there's going to be a whole story made around going in there, reading, exploring greater dimensions of life. But anyway, there is that. In JB Torrance's family, it's been tricky to get all of his papers released. James Chaucis has been trying for, I think, 22 years to get the lectures that he gave, it's another lecture other than Worship, Community, and the Triune God of Grace. This is the one book that JB Torrance has. There is another set of lectures that he did that apparently Andrew has it, but he has not made it available. I'm not sure what has been holding up or whatever. So James Chausis has been really working on that for all these years to get that published, as well as he's also trying to get all of the articles that JB ever did published in one book as well. But there are issues of release on that. So that's, a matter of prayer on that. And I have no idea what it is that holds these things up. But anyway, JB Torrance is to somebody again there's much more there. Todd Spidell said that Todd had been at JB's house one day, and there was a file cabinet that was literally front to back filled with personal letters between John McMurray and JB Torrance, which apparently when JB died, those files were not saved. And I don't know if some of them were saved. I asked Andrew about it, and he kind of, I couldn't really ascertain if there were even a few that were saved or not, or if somebody, there may be a few left somewhere, but those are the kind of things that, if I'd, been in the conversation earlier, I would have been, more aggressive in that. The world of COVID and the world of Zoom brought into play an international community here that, to say the nature of what, I have most fully done with TF Torrance studies has really been since COVID. I had a decent library then. I've now added everything I can get, and, virtually every day eBay sends me if there's anything new. And so if I see anything that's different, unusual, I get it. So I have, as complete as one can get of things that are published, even with a preface or something like that with TF Torrance. I get those things. So to say that TF Torrance has, become for me somebody who really is, as is said, the greatest theologian of the 20th century by virtue of the depth of his work, engaging all of the implied fields of theology. So he opens doors. He brings a clarity of thought as to the nature of Trinitarian thinking in a way that really undergirds the nature of who God is, what the church is about, and he has opened the door for an understanding of the world of what we would call therapeutic thought. Because, one of the other things that I do is the world of, family systems, attachment, all those kinds of therapy, because that is a part of the world of what it means to live out theology in a way that I think it's still being discovered and explored. And in many ways, I think that the comment that TF Torrance made about John McMurray, that he's opened a way, in a sense, for the study of the social sciences in a way that none of the other social scientists have. I think the things that I'm doing are the pointers that TF Torrance saw can be played out there. And people like Todd Spidell, Dan Price, there are some other people who picked up these things a bit, but not as overt as I'm hoping to do along the way. Or I bring these things into the practice of, doing therapy. So the whole nature of creating a community of theologians who recognize that the life of the church isn't just preaching, it isn't just the management of the programs of the year, and it isn't even just the pastor in the counselor's office or in the counselor's role, helping people to deal with kind of specific issues, but to recognize that the theological agenda that TF Torrance sets in place really does provide the possibility that the whole nature of the God who acts in the person of Jesus Christ extends that life through the work of the Spirit, invites us into something of what we might call a therapeutic community, where we're treated as a family relation that is more than just biological, but lives out of the very being of what we see in the Trinity, and how it asks questions, cares for, equips, comes alongside, extends that life into communities that I'm not sure that I've seen anybody that's quite gotten the depth of the theological vision and the practice of the working of it that I think are possible. Somebody like Andrew Purvis has, I mean, he's got a lot of the pieces that are there. I haven't seen quite the family system stuff, but I mean, what he does in the crucifixion and resurrection of ministry, those kind of things, are a theological rethinking of what needs to go away in, something of what we might call a franchising industry of the church, where the church becomes an institution and it runs and it does good things, but has it done the work of really the integrated life of the triune God in and through the community of the church in a way that really embraces and becomes something beyond the walls of the church in a way that feels kind of like Jesus out on the roads, and meeting each person with dignity and respect, and going to their houses and sitting and eating with them, and to say there's something there is an appropriate word, science, to say knowing how to go to people's houses and eat with them and have them walk away going, that was amazing. The food was great, but what I experienced with that person or those people, that changed me. And that's where I think theology really works out, where the nature of the being of relationship of those who know that they're truly beloved by the Father, Son, Spirit, and bring that into the experience of the people who they are with. I think we have so much room for a science of that's not controlling. It's the delight of exploration, right? Now I'm going to a Foursquare church right now, and the people are wonderful, and they're doing better than I've seen many churches do. The small group that I'm in has a diverse set of people. There are some who are more Pentecostal and who would like to see people speaking in tongues more, and others are going, tongues, what?
Oh, really?
And because it's not part of the nature of the tradition in the sense that they've experienced. It's not a church that pushes that a lot. It's really about being a church that's by the Spirit engaged in the community, and they'll pray in the church for people to be healed and all that, but what are more of an Assemblies of God kind of way of being that's more concerned about tongues is not as much the character of the Foursquare church. But again, the nature of how a pastor in a church creates a cultivated culture of the life of the triune God being present, active, speaking, and developing each person to be a minister, not by themselves, but in concert with the work of the Father, Son, and the Spirit, and that each person is going to be empowered. I've heard it said in words Bruce Larson had above the door of U Press as you went out, every member a minister, which is true, but there's kind of a seriousness with which you have to take that and say, you're not a minister by yourself. Right? You're joining with Jesus, and the time we spend here together, we're going to read the words that you learn to hear the voice of the shepherd, so that you aren't just a sheep. You're going to go out, and you're in a sense going to be somebody who cares for people with a shepherd-like spirit, and you're going to be able to attend to the dangerous situations and ward off those things that are threatening, and you can nurture and feed people in the places where they are. There are still, I'm not sure that I've ever seen a degree program that really trains somebody to get a Master of Divinity to be a minister in their place of work that's not a Christian place of work. In other words, you work at Microsoft, you work at Amazon, okay, we're going to do an MDiv and think through what it means for you to care for those people like Jesus would care for them, to have conversations that they would understand, and that where the nature of the way you speak and act and be there, that that you're sharing the ministry of Jesus there, but you're able to be a minister in this place. And it's not so much that you're trying to get conversions, it's that by your being there, conversions are happening because people are encountering something of the life of the living God in a way that changes them. Now, to me, I mean, we do talk about dual what is it, dual employment people, where you work part-time in the church and then you have another part-time job. But at some level, that separates the church and your workplace. It says, I'm doing this job over here so that I can do my hobby kind of part of the church, instead of saying, what would it look like to actually do full ministry equipping of somebody who's going to work, their full-time job is going to be in a quote unquote secular setting, but to really learn what maybe we just don't know enough yet. But I think that to be learning, if you're going to be working in a corporate setting, or if you're working in a place that sells, if you're working for Nordstrom's, that's our big selling here. I refer to Nordstrom's because they're so good on customer service. It's like the church should be as good on customer service as Nordstrom's is at taking care of people who come in to shop for clothes. So the whole question, I think, of who TF Torrance is, I think he raises the bar in the level of thinking in such a way that he implies that we should be able to engage in any context, serious thinking without losing our theological presuppositions, but we should be able to translate it so well in the context of the way that we work in the community, in our secular places, that people would not need to learn another language to get it, but the experience would be so transformative that there would be an acceptance and love that could only be the kind of love that comes from somebody who really has been overcome by the power of the love of God, the person of Christ, in that moment being led by the Spirit. And the other people wouldn't know, but they would be so impacted that there would come a point where the transformation in that person's life would be such that somebody could say to them, are you a Christian? You act just like a Christian. It's like, I haven't been to church, I haven't read the Bible, but I hang out with this guy. I hang out with this gal, and they've done something to me. The nature of who they are. Maybe there's something about who they are, because I think they're a Christian. Maybe there's something about that God that is why I am the way that I am. And Jesus walks in the room and says, oh yeah, you're mine. Oh yeah, I know you. I'm glad you finally noticed I was here. And so to say the nature of what we do so often speaks a separated language. And I think TF Torrance, the fact that he was nominated to the Royal Academy of Sciences by scientists who are not pre-inclined to theological agendas, the fact that he could be in that group, speak with them, gain their respect, says he had a skill set that we need, right? And it goes beyond just being a good theologian. It breathes his theology into all these other aspects of his life. So anyway, today I'm I consider myself a TF Torrance scholar. I've written articles. I've yet to write my big book on Torrance, and I just feel like, and that's why I have TF, the science of the personal, indwelling and expanding the methodology of TF Torrance. I feel like my place is to help people to see TF Torrance and to see beyond TF Torrance without leaving him, to see that there were places he couldn't get to yet, and that he by the character of what he did to, he went beyond the norm, and he really invites us to go beyond the norm. And I'm hoping this reading group itself invites in that direction, kind of. Bryden, did you want to say something?
If I were an American, Afro-American, I would be sitting here energized and activated and saying, preach it, brother, preach it, brother, preach it, brother, preach it, brother, at volume 10. I mean, seriously. I mean, this is magic stuff. I mean, thank you. I nearly didn't tune in today. I do have an agenda. I'm balancing this quote unquote secular life of yours. And
Yes.
I'm going, oh man, this balancing act. I mean, thank God I've been trying to do it for a while because it's tricky.
Yes.
If you're going to do it at the depth you're doing it. And I mean, I dare to suggest I've got to the stage in my 8th decade where I'm able to say, well, actually, here's a quiver full of arrows that you can use and shoot.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe you and I need a session, brother, before you even put to pen to paper, because I've tried to live that crazy triangulated life now for a very long time.
Right.
What decade? What
Oh,
decade?
Bill, I'm probably not into my 9th yet.
You're like 89 or something?
You're in the 80s.
No. That's the 9th decade, brother.
Oh, that's the
I'm
ninth.
in my 8th decade. I'm over 70, so there you go. There's no
Okay.
secret.
You sure look young. I mean, full of life, full of vitality. It's good.
Oh,
Well, I'm
so long as
about-
we don't mention the feet. We don't mention the feet.
We don't want to go down in defeat. That's true.
No, my feet are so stuffed the last 3.5 years, but I'm not going to bore you, so I'll move
Yes.
along. Thank you, Matt, for your beautiful time out.
The word triangulation, I mean, part of it is for the church to learn an integration or contextualization, as I say in my volume 1 of my face-to-face series. I said there are a number of books being written on the integration of theology and psychology. And I say there are some things that you can't integrate, but you can contextualize, and it becomes very helpful. So just the basic point that psychology begins with an individual with their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And theology, as I understand it, has no individual separated with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. All of who we are as persons is in relationship. But if you begin with who we are theologically as persons in relation with God, one another, and the world, you can then ask questions that psychology asks. Is this person functioning well, or is there a malfunction that's going on? And you can ask about the nature of what is malfunctioning, and is it just about them as an individual, or is it really because there are these systemic type things that the whole context of theology brings into play that need to be discussed? Which I was doing a training for Young Life yesterday. One of the people who, I mean, this is somebody at a regional level on Young Life. So, I mean, it's not just an area director. This is somebody who's an assistant regional director. And I talked about the word loneliness, and she said she had been talking to a psychologist who said loneliness doesn't need to be seen as a bad thing. It's just what you go through. And I said, well, loneliness doesn't kind of imply something's missing. And she said, no, he showed me that loneliness is just, it's what I'm experiencing being a high level professional who's working in several different major kind of things. And so I get lonely there, but there's nothing wrong. And I said, well, maybe you can do that from a psychologist's chair, but you can't do it from a systems chair. There's something that's missing for you. You don't feel known or seen or supported in something that I would like to discover what that is if I was your therapist, and figure out how you're getting the place you need in the community with the particularity of who you are. They don't have to understand everything you do, but I want them to know you enough and to value you that they affirm what it is that you're doing so that you don't feel lonely. And she couldn't quite back down because her psychologist had so convinced her that to hold on to the word lonely is not a problem, that in the end we just had to say, okay, we're thinking from different places. Got it. If it helped you, that's fine. I would probably say different things. But again, it just raised for me this whole sense that we live, I think, particularly in the United States, but generally in the West, in such an individualized place. And we're so fighting for dignity and being valued that it's easy for us to feel like I got an answer for something of me, the individual. Don't confuse me with this relationship stuff, because this is sustaining me for the moment. But it's like, this is where good theology just gives us so much of a broader relational understanding and really an empowerment of the community, that we never do feel alone, and hence the word loneliness always is going to be a word that's going to say it probably doesn't have to, you don't have to be lonely. And probably there's an invitation by the Spirit that is implicit in the loneliness to say, let's find what it looks like to see what is being drawn in you in that loneliness, to meet some need for you or others in that. I think when we're lonely and we don't invite others to help us, we're robbing them of something.
Interesting. Interesting.
I
And
just flagged the difference between being alone and
Yes.
loneliness. I
Yeah.
think you must tease that one out a lot, Marty.
yes, I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I thought you wouldn't. I thought you wouldn't. And I mean, I'm hearing you via loneliness, not via alone.
Yeah.
And
I use the word solitude with her. Solitude is a spiritual discipline where
oh,
one is alone.
yeah. That's what Matt
And-
was up to, and that's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting how the word good is repeated again and again and again and again in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
And then it's very good. And then in Genesis 2, you get this incredible statement, Adam, it's not good for you to be alone, mate. I mean, hey. You know, I mean, for me, that's the slogan of slogans. It's not good for Adam, and of course it's a collective noun as well as a personal name, to be alone. Oh, I mean, even celibates are not alone.
Right.
You know, I know many celibates who are not alone.
Yeah. And it just raised the
Anyway.
question of, how do we make room for what John McMurray calls the rhythm of withdrawal and return. He says it's appropriate to take time away, explore, learn, and then come back and share what you've learned or the questions that have come up. And part of the journey is this dynamic of being able to be with and by yourself, and not having to have one or the other, but to live in the flow of it in a way that accepts all of it. But I don't think one uses the word loneliness in that. And so your use of the word alone or having time in solitude, I think that's all appropriate. She raised the question of Jesus and Paul and others being lonely in the wilderness. I don't know if Jesus and Paul or the desert fathers, if they would have used the word loneliness for their experience of what it meant to be in those places. I haven't read.
Sorry, Marty.
That's okay. Go ahead.
It might be quite the opposite. I mean, those moments can be moments for deepening connection. So you can be in solitude, but deep connection. The danger of maybe where she's coming from, and I wasn't there, but you could almost kind of valorize the disconnection out of loneliness. Is like, no, you want to affirm solitude as a spiritual discipline for sure, but those times can be incredibly connecting times. And in fact, sometimes you need that to be connected, and community can leave you feeling disconnected. You know all this. So that's an interesting discussion. But I think you can have solitude can be a way of getting reconnected, actually.
Yeah, no, I think that may be totally true. And I said, I think that the Desert Fathers went away to commune with God, that there is this setting aside of time. I've just finished the section in 3D4 on the ethics of being before God, and particularly Sabbath. That Sabbath is not a time of being away or not active. It's making space for both God and others. And so it's a way of affirming the activity of God by our own activity of being with God and with one another and celebrating that life together. So Sabbath does have a sense of rest. And so one can be aside and rest and read and pray. But to say, God's all about making space for connection, and that is an important piece of what even the seventh day of the rest, there is hey, I'm going to hang out over here and rest away from y'all. The nature of resting was also communing with all that God created, including Adam and Eve. And so to really get, I think what Bryden's saying there, that there are these rhythms, there are these ways of being that that we don't put things in one box or the other, but we say, you know, there are times of being apart because we need the space to pray or breathe or whatever it is we need to do. And then there are times that we are gaining the all that lies behind the phrase there, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Right? And that is good too, but that is not loneliness. It is a being alone that is making for a joyful reunion, that one is the anticipation of that fills the joy even in that not being back together yet. Which, I mean, I remember some churches that I've been to, I couldn't wait for Sunday to be with those people. It was absence makes the heart go fonder. The week was totally anticipating it. Not every church that I've been in has created that in me. And so it always raises this sense, you know, are we really doing church well if there isn't a sense that being with those people just makes you yearn to be with them again, because you feel loved and known and growing and all that in such a way that you go, yeah, that's what health looks like.
Don't you want to go where everybody knows your name?
Somebody could
Yeah.
do a TV show about that, probably, huh?
That's a great intro song.
It is a great intro song, yeah. So, and again, Jesus' statement, "You are my friends," which John McMurray was very big. I mean, that was one of the books that he wrote, is "Ye are my friends." He used the King James version of it. That the very nature of the Christian life. I mean, this was kind of the summation of my doctorate, that for Karl Barth, being a free person is already won for us in the person of Christ. It's already an actuality. The question is whether we wake up to it or not, which is not conditional in so much as it is just the consequence of not being fed by the world that tells us God isn't here and that you aren't loved and all that. So it's just attuning to reality. For John McMurray, there is a condition of being a free person, and that is being friends. That until one achieves a place of knowing that you are known and loved and accepted, the word freedom wouldn't apply. For John Zizilis, to be a free person is to participate in the Eucharist with a bishop present, and to participate in the eschaton, which is not sometime further down. It is the church in all of its grandeur in heaven, so to speak, one might say. One is free in that participation in the meal that joins us to the whole body of Christ and to his church, with all these E's in place: Eucharist, Episkopos, eschaton. There's one other E, but anyway, it is again conditional. And so I'm writing as a Protestant, going, "Hey, Zizilis, what about me?" You know,
Yeah,
there's an
exactly.
exclusion of the meal here. So anyway, that is one of the problems of what I call the problems of the conditionality of McMurray and Zizilis, that Barth doesn't have. His is the already actualized unconditional freedom as persons, because Jesus is free for us. And the only question is whether we will live in the light of reality or live with the lie that we are separate, need to condition God, or something like that. So that's my doctorate in a nutshell.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that, Marty. That was rich.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, the phrase "doctors for the church," I mean, we talk about doctors for the church as those who are kind of great scholars, but to say, you know, everything that we're talking about here is to say, you know, what does it look like for somebody to be able to walk into a church and to just begin to see, you know, out of a theological place, you know, is the presence of the Father really felt here? Is the
Yes.
presence, the voice of the Son truly heard here? And people don't walk out just saying, "I love the preacher here," but the preacher preaches in such a way that I almost lose the preacher because the voice of Jesus becomes so clear and articulate through what is said here. And that the nature of the Spirit is at work in such a way that people, they feel empowered to love others. They feel that others in the place by the Spirit are led to just treat them with dignity and respect, and that the belonging piece, Bill, that you just mentioned, that all is at play, and they can recognize the Spirit is doing that. These people didn't just go to a class on it, but that the indwelling in Scripture and the life that is nurtured in us and for us there, it all comes into 3D dimensions. It all
You know,
becomes the reality.
it does, and it's, you want to go where you feel a sense of worship and connectedness to the Trinity,
Yeah.
through Jesus and the Spirit, to the Father and his love. And you remember I talked about this, or asked you about it some time ago, when Torrance was talking to or one of his letters to Florovsky.
Yeah.
And lamenting the fact that they had a fenced Eucharist. I would have loved to have heard been a fly on the wall to hear what George Dragas and Torrance had to say about that.
Yeah.
About that restricted communion. Torrance did write, I think therein somewhere, that the Orthodox worship service is the most biblical. That's in one of the participations.
Right.
That Orthodox worship service is the most biblical. I think he used the word most. And that led me, after my retirement, to visit Orthodox churches to see what Torrance was talking about.
Yeah.
And
And
there
what
is
did you experience?
Worship, except at the end, where I was not invited to come up and share.
Worship, except for yeah.
That's like a big fence coming down.
Right. So when you say worship and everything up to that point, I mean, what can you take us into what it is that you were experiencing, that the word worship truly applied?
The scriptures, the chanting, and particularly there's one about the cherubim. How does that go? It's a sense of peace, of connectedness. I mean, even with the people about you, I mean, they did bring, several brought up the blessed bread. You can partake of the bread, but not the mixture of wine and bread that they spoon out of the chalice. But I came to be friends with one of the priests in the Antiochian church, we're still in touch with email. He just over the fence there in the next town. So, but I haven't been back to their congregation since the pandemic began.
Yeah.
Maybe one.
Well,
go ahead.
I think there is much about Orthodoxy. I mean, I just feel like I have a ton to know, and not all Orthodox people think exactly the same. So one does have to, just recognize that, like the rest of us, there are lots of nuances that one has to get used to. But there's a depth of respect for tradition and for ancient voices. There is a sense that those voices still speak, the nature of the icon, and that we've got the family on the wall here, and they're not silent. And we believe that the reason that those icons are there is to give us a dimensional sense. Window is a great word. Yep. I think all of that brings a kind of richness that we don't kind of get in Protestant churches. The nature of the sense that we really come to pay attention to one who's coming to bring Jesus to us, the coming behind the iconoclast, the nature of the coming from and to. There is a directionality to that.
The
Um,
reverse perspective
yeah.
on the icon.
Instead of I showed up at church today, what am I going to get out of it? And
Inverse perspective, right? It's not reverse.
Yes,
It's
yes,
inverse.
it is. Yeah.
Inverse. That's
so
interesting. Yeah.
there's a mediatorial kind of role there. I think there are different ways you could do that, but I appreciate the nature of that. The from to-ness, from the voice of God through Scripture, and this person who serves in bringing that word so that we are addressed and participate in the hearing of that word and responding and all that.
Well, there is something also to be said about Fifth Avenue Presbyterian. They have an excellent virtual service, a live stream. Fifth Avenue Presbyterian meets at 11 a.m. Eastern, and the choir they publish along with their live stream their bulletin with the words of the anthems, and we've experienced this on several occasions. Quite worshipful. Through Jesus to the Father in the Spirit. And it's not quite like orthodoxy, of course, but it is our Father.
Yeah.
It is through Jesus, and it is in the Spirit, and it is worshipful. So
yeah.
And the sermon's very good too. What's his name? Black, actually. What's his name, Harriet? You remember? Scott Black Johnson is a Princeton guy. So.
Very good.
You've never touched base? I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Behind this conversation, I think, to use the word context, is a fundamental shift in what that context is ecclesiologically. We Westerners, particularly Reformation Christians, we have this not dichotomous view of church, visible, invisible. We actually have a trichotomous view. And I dare to suggest that in America, in particular, your language over the fence a moment ago, by trichotomous, I'm trying to say there is the so-called invisible church. That too is a debate around what is corpus, the corpus mysticum, which is another discussion shortly, perhaps, because of what I'm about to say. Then there are two forms of visible. There's the organizations, plural, and then there's that particular organization to which I belong. And we are far too comfortable as Reformation people with multiple organizations. Far too comfortable. Because when you shift from the Latin West to the Greek East, a Eucharist with the three E's, as you put it so beautifully, Marty, that is a microcosm of the entire macrocosmic body of Christ with his head. And that's the big debate about the primacy of Peter, the priority of Peter versus the priority of Peter. Because in one sense, the Orthodox will say every single Christian is Peter. Why? Because they confess with Matthew 16 with Peter. And it's a staggering shift in context. And we Westerners have really got to be, how do I put it, de-schooled, to use that Latin American version of liberation theology. To be de-schooled out of a mentality that says, I will tolerate tribalism, ecclesial tribalism. Wow. Now, okay, I've lived 45 years with a Roman Catholic wife, and I've now decided it's time to shoot with my, 6-gun. And I'm letting off bullets amazingly over the last 3 years. I've had enough. Because if you take the Greek East, which is very biblical, I agree with Torrance wholeheartedly for lots of reasons. I intimated in The Lion, the Dove, and the Lamb, chapter 8. There is this extraordinary sense, hey, the local bishop, how many bishops for a sociology? The local bishop with the Eucharistic gathering, that is a microcosm of this cosmic thing.
Yeah.
Of this cosmic thing. That's why you walk into an apse, and I mean, you've probably seen it, Bill, you know, with the Revelation 4 over the top of your head. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's enough. I mean, it's a radical deschooling of the context in which we perform Eucharist and church, therefore, and assembly. It's very, very fascinatingly difficult for us Latin Reformation types. There you go.
It is most effective with his nave. You walk into what we call in Protestant world the sanctuary. They call it a nave, I think, and it's magnificent. It's a small church, but recently rebuilt after a fire, and the iconostasis was borrowed from another. Not borrowed, given as a gift from a previous Orthodox church somewhere else. Anyway, the painting, the colors.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. It all connects. And I tell you, there it except for that fence. Except that.
Darn that fence.
Yeah. And you go into a church in Zurich, which is absolutely wonderfully Puritanly nothing in terms of archaeology and furniture. Sorry, architecture and furniture. It's just a space. And I'm going, oh, righto, fair enough.
But that space also can be filled. Yes, it can be filled with the Spirit. And it starts the heart, the mind, but
because God is there.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
But it's good to have a little priming of the pump when you walk in and like Biden, you know, above you.
Something of beauty, yes.
Antiquator of all the world, all the cosmos, all of the cosmos.
Yes.
Just beautiful.
Yes, you triggered the fourth E for me, Brighton. The fourth E was ecclesia. There can't be an ecclesia without an episcopos who celebrates the Eucharist, which brings us to participate in the eschaton, i.e., the Church Universal. So, I mean, that's a family system almost thing. You know, all these things work together in tension with one another, and the dynamic of each one respects a component of the whole life of God in heaven, on earth, as persons show up and become part of this community. And so there's an interwovenness. I love Paul's phrase in Colossians, the hearts may be knitted together. You know, it was a area known for sheep and knitting. So I mean that the language of knitting was on his mind, I think, is a beautiful contextual piece too. But the whole question about how spiritual formation happens with the knitting of our hearts together, both with other humans as well as God. I mean, I think we haven't taken the metaphor as seriously maybe as we could. And at some level, the Orthodox Church has a beautifully knitted something going on there. It is knitted together in a way. And if you pull one strand out, the whole thing will fall apart in a sense. And so in that sense, there is a profound dimension of what we might call a biblical sense. There's always the question of the particularity of the person, that how that works out in the Orthodox tradition, the degree to which we value the walking out the door, not losing any of what you've just experienced, but in a sense, how does the thread, and here I'm using a George MacDonald thread, you know, the thread that they used to go into the mines and all that was heaping connected to the nature of reality. How does the red, was it a gold thread or red? I can't remember the color of the thread, but anyway, it is the ability of that ongoing sense of the interwovenness that is maintained, and I can find my way back. Even in this moment, I just go, zip, yep, I'm still connected to all of that in this moment. Yes, Bryden.
What are James and John doing when Jesus finds them in Mark's gospel? I'll answer the question. They are knitting together, they're repairing their nets, the same Greek word as you have just quoted, katartizein. And I once stumbled upon this reality by sheer fluke.
Wow.
And I'm going, oh, right. So church is actually repairing the nets. And I'm going, oh man, I like that. I mean, as a pastor, you're standing in the pulpit and you've got to grab the imagination. And katartizein. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'm probably wrong, Matt. You'll look it up and you'll be
even
fine.
If you're wrong, we can use it and just quote you on it. We won't have to worry about the origin. We'll just say Bryden saw this and said it.
That'll work.
That'll work.
It's inspiring in any case, regardless what the Greek word might be, because there is that image. And I mean, I just think, Bill, of your son and the work that he's doing with divided peoples and the nature of the knitting together that is implied, to be there. If I understood what he's doing in studying cultures that have been divided by politics, the church should be that culture that knits the net together.
Amen.
I'm just going to look it up.
Okay.
I'm not satisfied.
That's okay. I would love, when we have our next pandemic, to have churches well enough equipped that they are the people who not only provide, quick service of getting people sanitary food and medication, but counseling, how to work through with family, that the church becomes it's a little bit of an arc with nets, so we the wovenness together of churches of all traditions who recognize we need one another to live in this world and to be the blessing and presence that the church in a sense is called to be in its visible form. I have, when I teach ecclesiology now, I say, everything that we call church, the building, the service, that's all parachurch, actually, which I have done a lot with Young Life, which is labeled parachurch alongside of or outside of the church. But it was Howard Snyder who made this point. The church is the body of Christ. Anything that we do as human beings to serve the body of Christ, head in Jesus, and all those who align with him, anything we do is parachurch. So every tradition, denomination, church building, all of that, they are all parachurch. There is one authority, that is the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the head of his church. And he invites us to serve him in all kinds of ways and to build buildings and things like that. But to not get confused and to think that the church is our church. We're just a bunch of parachurch people. So anyway, that's my revision on drawing the lines.
As to the Orthodox, it depends on which Orthodox I've found you attend, and the Greek didn't do it for me, to use vernacular, as much as the Antiochian church did. Maybe it's because of the priest and just the congregation was just, I found, knit together.
Yeah. And it could be from priest to priest in the same tradition, even.
Yes.
That could be there.
So, and very much so like Protestants. That seems to.
Absolutely. So,
back
Brian,
in the
you
day,
put some verses up. Oh, go ahead. Back in the day.
No, I'm done. I've said too much.
Back in the day.
Oh, well, Linda would recognize that back in the day with the Worldwide Church of God, before we had a drastic change of had a great awakening in our church.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the the gatherings on the Sabbath, the Saturday Sabbath, were knit together at that time, through families and friends and through Jesus Christ, and we just had a lot of incorrect ideas about doctrine.
And Jesus still loved you anyway.
Didn't we, Linda? But
yeah.
I would say as a kid, mom and dad were knit, but I wasn't.
Huh.
So I'll just put it
What was
that way.
missing for you?
I may have had a couple friends who would play with me, but a lot of the kids that I went to school with, of course, I went to the church school up until 8th grade. Didn't want anything to do with me. So it was like I wasn't a PK, I wasn't a preacher's kid, so I wasn't on their level.
I didn't know that. I wouldn't have asked you if I'd known that.
Yeah. No, it's kind of interesting. I remember going to the festivals, and mom and dad would have friends that they would hang out with and do things with. My dad was really into ham radio, and so he had a group of people that and but I ended up a lot of times just running around by myself or with my brothers or something. But yeah, it was kind of, for me, it was a very lonely experience. But I'll tell you this much though, my first experience of the Holy Spirit, this may sound kind of weird, but I was sitting in the bleacher section of Squaw Valley, and we were singing hymns, and I just felt the presence of the Lord. All those people gathered together, and it was just like God was there. Our theology was probably all screwed up, but he was present. So, and I couldn't have been more than 8 or 10 years old, but
Yeah.
Wait, feast site? Did you say, Linda, a feast site?
Yeah, it was a fall festival. Squaw Valley, California.
Feast of Tabernacles, we kept.
Feast of Tabernacles, that's right. Yeah.
Whoa.
All holy days and Saturday Sabbath.
Yeah.
So
only,
we learned
only tabernacles.
We kept all of the holy days.
Pentecost
and
Pentecost,
Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur is a fast day, 24-hour fast day from evening to evening. So
right.
The
kids hated that.
Well, the whole thing with kids, I mean, Linda, I'm struck by your, just the feeling as a child. I mean, we have so much work to do on kids, and I mean, just yesterday we were with our tax accountant, and she just talked about growing up in Switzerland and then coming to the United States, and just the meanness of kids to her, and that it didn't go away when she got even up into high school, that she was a bit tall and lanky, and it's like somehow the church, it just seems to be there should be something to recognize that the very environment where kids are so being formed, that there's something that we can do that can at least stop the bullying, if not creating a safety of knowing and being known, where each child is valued. And I don't know, there's got to be some huge dreams to what that would look like, and it would be the church doing that work in the formative process. I mean, those few verses of Jesus growing in favor with God, and man, I mean, he had some good years there. And for a kid to grow up and not have that, it's like the trauma and tragedy of it. I mean, I know God can work, but go for it, Braden.
Where are our children once they reach the age of 5? The answer is in school.
Yeah.
And our eldest child is an extraordinary teacher. She's a lovely woman, and she's now at a school in Melbourne having been in a different cultural place, which I won't name, an all boys school, where
Yeah.
the administration and everything else. But the point is this: the principal and the staff have created a culture. And it's a culture where the staff are incredibly mindful of each other.
Mm.
Their forms of communication face to face and via email are, she thinks, are exquisite. And she's quite a woman, our daughter, in terms of just what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So she fits. And at the other place, she was trying, but didn't have the authority to kind of implement too much, the levers. She just didn't have the levers. And I think, Marty, that church, the way we practice church, without those small groups, you mentioned Howard Schneider, without the radical Wesley stuff of small groups, which is the cells of the body, and the congregational level is another level, and we have to do that differently to the cell level. And how we knit together, therefore, through emails and face-to-face, becomes extraordinarily difficult. And actually, you're talking school culture, because that's what we do in the West. We educate these creatures. And that's the space, that's the context they function in. So whatever teachers you have and know, that's where you spend your time. Trying to mentor them, because they are the gold or they're the dross. Take your pick.
When I worked as a custodian, I was a substitute custodian, so I'd be at a different school every night, and I would often get to talk to teachers and librarians, and it was markedly different depending upon usually who the principal was and the degree to which they were committed to what you talked about, creating a culture. And some of them had amazing, wonderful stories, and some of them had amazing, horrific stories that all depended on the culture that was created by the leadership at the top. So I totally get that. But it just seems like there has to be a place in the church to, recognize and find ways to deal with these things at a level that is systemic. I think of Sir Ken Robinson, his whole idea that education's making us dumb because it's just conforming us to a workplace kind of environment that's in a sense gone, and we've not taught kids to be creative and integrative and all these other things. And to say there is a kind of dumbness that is there, that the church really should be at the lead of learning and expanding the life of creativity and being in helpful, loving relationships and all those things, so that we're prepared for the world that we hope we're developing into. Right.
And I think it has to start in a place, though, where embodied creatures and physical environment becomes basic. And when I was a full-time vicar, which I haven't been for quite a long time, the whole question of cell groups, house groups, where it's small enough to be intimate, but large enough to have resource. Because, you can't have a group of 5 people, really. A group of 12 is pretty good. When it's 20, it's a bit too big. This kind of stuff, it's part of group dynamics. I mean, it's sociology and psychology. And I think the exciting thing is, when you use this understanding of stuff, it becomes that place that you want to go back to. You really want to engage. And food became for us very important.
Very important.
The first 45, 50 minutes was food. And the pattern of life, particularly with its young families and so on. We worked very hard in that area, and boy, does it reap rewards.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the nature of the church in New Zealand, I don't know if it's better or worse. Mike Hobbits said that he felt like in New Zealand, there's a general apathy was the word that he used, which means the church hasn't, there's an invigoration that is part of the joy of life that one would hope that the eating together and the gathering and creating a place where one belongs would be part of what it is that creates that. He said he could place pastors all over the place. There are still places for people to go in churches, which I find is not the case here. It's harder and harder to find. If somebody gets a degree in divinity or something, to find a place that can sustain them is getting harder and harder. And schools are closing. So if you actually go on and do education, it gets harder and harder to justify the money because you may be stuck in debt for a long time. But the nature of apathy here, there is an apathy here. I don't know what you would say in the UK. It seems like it's maybe beyond apathy. There is maybe resistance, but I think that's different places are different there as well. People say, look at Europe if you want to
yeah.
know what's gonna happen in the United States. It's like, well, it's pretty bad already here. And I haven't been able to assess there.
Yeah.
And New Zealand,
England is, I mean, we've got connections, as you know, in England. It's very localized. West Country, Midlands, Oxfordshire, north of England. It's very, very specific to the bits of the country you're in.
Yeah.
And in New Zealand, it's very specific to North Island versus South Island.
Yeah.
Oh.
And even the north of the South Island and the south, I mean, Dunedin versus Marlborough Plains are quite distant from one another, as you would know.
Yeah.
So yeah. But
generalizations are difficult.
Yeah. I once had a dream. This is one of Marty's crazy dreams. That there would be a resident theologian in all of the major cities. Like Seattle would actually have more than one, but in Everett, I mean, these are some of the major cities here. And the job of this theologian is to get to know the politicians in the town, the Chamber of Commerce, the superintendent of public schools, and that their job was to listen to all of them and then to go back to the church and say, here's what's happening in our town. And here I think are the needs. Let's find the people in the church who can help meet those needs. And a lot of it's going to be, theory and applying theory of integration and knitting and breaking down walls and taking misconceptions and saying, no, that is not the actual what's going on. I know this person, let's bring him and have a conversation. But their sole job is not to be a teacher as a theologian, but to be a listener and a facilitator of the people in that place doing things differently. So it's at another level than the small group you're talking about, but it's seeing a layer in the culture and putting somebody in place to do that. And the idea of having that be a chair, an endowed chair, so that raising money was never the issue. To have an initial investment in the money, and then this person is just freed to be this servant of the community at every level it could be there. But anyway, I mean, that's kind of like what we used to call bishops in a sense, but they managed the church and they didn't engage the Chamber of Commerce and the political offices and those things. So this is really saying, what would it look like for that kind of a person, where the church really does take a servant role in all the identifiable places that management and facilitation of the place we live are all brought to the table, and maybe literally, and friendships are bridged by this person. What would that look like? So anyway, that's a wild, crazy dream. When the person I talked to said, what kind of mushrooms have you been eating? So anyway, it's just a vision for the wisdom of the church to make a difference in the practicalities of life. I mean, that's the part of that vision.
I've thrown up the Anglican model of a dean of a cathedral. You're actually describing what an ideal dean should be. They're not the administrator. You pay somebody else to do all that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But the dean of a cathedral leads the worship, engages with the whole civitas, the structural levels of organization in the community. That's their turf. And I think I know some very, very good deans, and I've sure met some very, very bad ones. It's a shocker when you meet a bad dean, because it's a denial of what the thing should be, as you just described.
Yeah. It seems like there was a dean, a person who'd been in the dean of the cathedral in Christchurch, who was at Dunedin when I was there. I'm trying to remember what his first name was. He was teaching in pastoral studies, I think.
Wow.
That would have been in
You're
the early
1990s,
90s.
aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Um, I mean, one of the better deans actually has left Nelson now, and he's a very, very gifted man in retirement. Mike Hawke. I mean, Mike was my vicar for quite a long time. He grew a church to 650 ASA, average Sunday attendance, and he grew it over 20 plus years. Yes, the back door was wide as well. I mean, the front door was wider, but the back door was wide. Of course it is. But he understood what engagement looked like. And as a dean, he was very unconventional, and some people didn't like it.
Yeah,
because you're not doing sung evensong quite properly, you know.
Oh well.
But yeah. But it's an interesting series of questions.
Yeah,
I've got to go in about 5 minutes, Marty. I'm terribly sorry, but
yes, no,
thank
that's
you.
okay. I have to go too. My wife wanted me to come. The person who's fixing our internet is supposed to come, and she said, "Get home as quickly as possible in case he has questions." Like, okay. So anyway,
and Bill seems to have vacated his mountain scene, but
the mountains are there.
I loved his Eastern Orthodoxy. I really did. Gosh, it was good.
Yes. And of course, Todd is just coming now. Now that we're about ready to leave, Todd's going to come.
Oh dear. Oh, sorry.
Hello, Todd.
Hello.
Yes, we've missed you, but we're looking at signing off here. Did you have a particular question or comment, or are you just saying hi?
Oh, well, I guess I am just saying hi, but I could come up. I do have a question if you want, but I suppose we're past the 3 o'clock point. So
if it can be, no, well, you have 2 minutes if you want. You have 2 minutes for a question.
Okay. If like either of you gentlemen, I don't know who else is on here. I guess there's a bunch of folks. Okay.
There's a bunch of folks.
If anybody wants to expound on the Latin heresy.
Go, Marty.
Bryden, go for it. No, go for it, Bryden.
Well, it's a chapter. I think you're quoting a particular chapter, aren't you? In evangelical theology, and Karl Barth or something. I'm scratching my head, of course. Sorry. There is a particular chapter. My understanding also, it crops up in a chapter in theology in theological science. No, anyway, somewhere around there. The Roman doctrine of grace and the Reformation or something. My understanding of it is, first of all, it's dualistic, classic Tom Torrance. You've got an intelligible, noetic world, and you've got a material, sensible world. And it's grace that bridges the two. Grace as a quasi-substance. And the substance is, of course, distributed instrumentally via an organization. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, for goodness sake. And then it's the personal mediator of Jesus, who is both mediation and the mediator in one. In other words, it's revelation and reconciliation in one, as we saw in the doctrine of God. So that's probably enough from me. But Marty, supplement and correct, please.
Well, I'm just trying. I'm just trying to bring it up. There was a chapter that I read relatively recently, though it's been about a year, in the book on his second book on Karl Barth, that has a chapter on the Latin heresy. It ties in also to natural theology, I believe, the nature of the Aristotelian sense of how nature is looked at within the theology of Roman Catholicism, that it becomes dualistic, as you said, right, and has these divisions. And so the nature of Eucharist, the nature of how we understand God, all has this built-in Achilles tendon that does not maintain the purity and unity of God as the creator of the world and all that. That's right. So that's the
Sorry,
best I
Todd.
can do at the moment.
Yeah.
I can look at more. I'm sure that there are some articles in some of the handbooks that I have on that, Todd, and I can scan or take pictures and send you some of those to get a little bit clearer on that.
And I mean, I have the book up in my library, which is up on the homestead, and I can scan that chapter, the particular chapter with that particular title, Todd. I think too that chapter 10, the Roman Doctrine of Grace, is very, very seminal.
Yeah.
So I can sort of isolate those two for you and find the books and squirt on the Facebook page. I'm going up again next week, so I can do that
That'd
for
be
you,
great.
Todd.
Bill, you want
And
to say
Marty,
something
if
there?
you can do your stuff, please do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just came into the middle of the conversation, but had to leave a bit. Is he talking? He mentioned the Latin heresy.
Yeah.
Is he
Just
talking
ask for
about
clarification.
Karl Barth and the Latin heresy?
Well, Torrance also took over. He also called that. It originated, I think, with Bart, but I think Torrance maintained the language.
Well, there's a article in that was published in the Scottish Journal of Theology,
Right.
by the very Reverend Professor TF Torrance,
Yeah,
titled Karl Barth and the Latin Heresy.
that would be helpful.
Is that what Tim?
That I think that would be what Todd.
Oh,
I mean, that would
Todd.
be helpful to Todd's the one that asked the question. So that may be the chapter that's in the book, but if you do you have access to that article?
Yes, I do. I could. Todd, if you'll message me your email, I'll send you a copy if you'd like.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Count
Okay.
me in too, please.
Oh, sure.
If you want, you could
And
just
I'll check
post it on the Facebook site if you would like. On the reading group Facebook, you can just
Oh, put it on the Facebook. Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, well, I'm gonna sign off then and say thank you all for a lovely conversation, and I hope there's been benefit and dreaming, and someday somebody will discover this and say, that's what I've been looking for, is somebody who thought like that. I think I know the next step.
That's right.
So-
And thank you, Marty.
Thank you. It's great
Thank
to
you.
be with you all. Next
you.
week, I think we have Gary Detto on Back to the
All right.
Christian Doctrine of God.
Good.
Okay, very good.
Bye-bye. God